Okay.
How long have you been doing that?
Oh, well, we just went live. I know people
Oh,
are starting
sorry.
to ask me questions right when we go live. But since you,
Obviously, I'm not a pro.
yeah, me neither, obviously. Since I should have given you like the, which I did not do. So I apologize for that. But let me just answer your question. Let me defer that for a second. But joining me today, extra special guest, Claire Sergent. Sorry, I tried to pronounce your name right, but I'll just stick with that. So Claire, can you just say who you are and what you do for those who might not know you?
Yes. So hello, and thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Claire Sergent in French, and I'm now a professor at Paris University, Université de Paris. And I've studied biology a long time ago, and then and I was always fascinated by the subject of mind in general, and I discovered that cognitive sciences existed. So I conducted a PhD with Stan Dehaene, um, and I got my PhD in 2005, and then I went to different places at UCL, so University College London, and then back in Paris, working with also clinical people like Lionel Nakache, and then in the end, Université de Paris, where I am, and all that time I was always interested in the general topics of attention, perception, and consciousness.
Very cool. Wow. Okay. So there's a lot there. Now, I'm sorry that I cut you off and did this sort of cold open on you, but you were asking me right before we went on how long I've been doing this podcast or series or thing. It just passed the 3-year mark. So June 28th, 2018 is when I had my first guest, who was Hak-Wan Lau. And I used to do a podcast before this with Pete Mandic, another philosopher, and I really enjoyed it. But I found that what I enjoyed the most was just having the conversation part, and then not the taking it afterwards and editing it and adding the sound bites. He did all that stuff. And so I just kind of picked up where we left off and just said, I just want to talk to people. So
okay, cool. Sounds
yeah,
good.
Thank you. And mostly it's because I'm nosy. I just want to know what people are up to, and I do want to understand the views that I don't agree with from the point of view of the people who defend them. So I think that's important for generally. But I want to ask you just a general question before we get to your particular work, and if you don't mind, about so your interest in attention and consciousness. You described your trajectory. You ended up doing a PhD with Stan. I want to ask you about all that stuff. But I'm also curious about if the ASSC played any role during that journey, and whether you would care to comment on what you think the value or role of that society is for people interested in the things that we're interested in. Because let me just say that I'm interested in the way that consciousness science is, as I see it, poised to become sort of a workaday area of neuroscience, much as I view what attention did in the 90s till now. So, and I think the ASSC has a large role to play there. And so I just wonder if you agree, or what your thoughts about that, if you care to share them. You could say no, by the way.
No, I think I definitely agree with that. Okay, so you mean both from a more personal perspective? I mean, it really made me realize that I belonged to a family that had the same language as me, the same with whom I could exchange with no need for much translation in what we're talking
or censorship, right? You don't have to watch what you say. You could type.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and as you said, and the other part is probably, I don't know if I'm a good judge, but probably it's an important association for making this this topic of investigation honorable, scientific, sound scientific, and yeah, I guess it played an important role in that, and that's yeah.
Did you feel, just as so more personally from your journey, did you feel when you first started becoming interested in science that consciousness was a legitimate topic of study for science, or did you become convinced of that sort of on the way? Or yeah, I'm curious about how you saw it at the beginning.
Okay. Well, okay. It depends where you place the beginning.
Yeah. Ah, you are a philosopher, I see.
I am. Well, no, a fake one. I
We're
just
all
have,
fake
you
ones
know,
nowadays. It's all right.
the phrases and things. No, well, I noticed, I mean, I had no specific preconceptions of whether there were topics that were out of bounds for science and others that would not. I just realized when I joined before my PhD, I joined John Driver's lab studying attention and hemi-neglect patients at UCL. And I did realize that around that time, before the 2000, the topic was considered as maybe not entirely scientific, and it was better to just simply speak about attention.
Right.
And that would do. But in the end, when you study hemi-neglect, you study people that do process some information unconsciously.
Right.
So
Right. So it's just, you're just avoiding the topic really but
yeah,
saying
exactly.
it in a way that makes it respectable.
Yeah, exactly. And then just looking at the experiments that were being done and the results that emerged, that was just obvious that we were tackling the issue
Right.
directly and raising, and on the way raising important points that we had not foreseen before. So I think, the question of it, whether it's legitimate or not, is just waved away by evidence, by the work that was being made. So
Right.
and then that was also comfortable to be in the shadow of Stan Dehaene, because like nobody would say to Stan Dehaene, that's not legitimate what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
But then
So it helps to have someone that's respected, that's also taking the thing seriously. Then you
yes,
can say
but
it. Right.
the bottom line is, okay, everyone is able to recognize the value of a conclusion when it's presented correctly. So I think
Yeah.
that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. I think that's a nice way of putting it, that the proof is in the pudding or whatever. Like the work that's being done, it justifies the existence of the field. We don't need a special plead. So I like that way of putting it, because I do think of, I know this is sort of abstract, but part of the reason why I like these conversations, I'm thinking about the next generation of, the ones that are coming up behind us, so to speak. And I want them to feel like there's a place. And I know that when I was a graduate student, part of what drew me to this was there was the ASSC, there was a place I could submit papers and go and talk to people that cared about the same stuff, sort of the same things that you were just saying. And in other fields, I didn't notice that in like philosophy of language or just straight philosophy of mind. So I think that's important, that there is this identity that we have, that we know the people that, of course, now whether that survives is the question, I guess. Because I guess some people worry, but anyway, well, let's take. Yeah, so some people are worried that the field is, I guess I won't name those people, but we could deduce who they were. But some people are worried that the field is sort of not taken seriously by people outside of it because of the influence, maybe the disproportionate influence that certain theories have, which imply certain absurd results, maybe that rhyme with like smy, me or something like that. So I'm not trying to have a debate about that. I'm just saying that there are some people who are worried that from the outside, it looks like it's like politics and big names, but not real like worried about science.
Okay.
But you disagree with that. But I think the global workspace theory is on safe ground.
I can see your point, but I'm maybe more optimistic. Like, first, I think we so much enjoy, and we can feel it. We so much enjoyed these gatherings,
right?
That will find a way to make them live, and you'll notice that. I mean, by the very force of the production we have,
Right.
that's what makes us legitimate. But yeah, I see what you mean. There are
And it's
also
also hard though, because
problems
like
of
what,
grants
right,
and
exactly.
things like that.
And labs too, though. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you tell a student that comes to you and says, I want to study consciousness? Where do I go? And you say Europe, I guess. I mean, because we're in the US, there are people like out and out saying, I'm
Yeah.
studying
So
consciousness.
yeah, there's an US Europe issue probably there as well.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully things will change. But so it's good, I think, that people see what we're doing, that we're out and we're open. We're not like secretive about it. Anyway, so I appreciate your openness and thank you for sharing. But I want to ask you also about the global workspace theory, because as far as I understand your work, you take yourself to be defending that view. I think maybe you even think maybe it's true or something. Can I just ask, like, what is do you think it's just a working hypothesis, or do you think it's something more, the global workspace hypothesis?
Oh, well, it has to be a working hypothesis. I mean,
Uh,
we're
Well, I'm sort of thinking, do you think it's true? Like, do you think there's evidence that you convinces you to think that is true, or more than could be
yes, but
true?
there are yes, but there are as in every model, there are many things there, some of which are untrue, and the paper I've just published recently is actually showing that some of the aspects of the global workspace were not true, and I'm very, very happy to be doing that, because I think the role of a model is to
Be
produce.
falsified.
Yeah, well, not only, I mean, I think not only, obviously, to be falsifiable is a very interesting feature for a model, otherwise it's not very useful, but also I think we really do need to have a path to put our feet on. Like,
Right.
I assume this is it is like this, and then if it is like this, I'll go that way, and that will direct, not only give me falsifiable predictions, but also direct my thinking.
Right.
So I think, well, maybe it's only personal, but I cannot um, make these long strides if I don't have a model to just relax my mind on
Right.
something that's like, I assume it's settled. Okay, and if it's settled, then this. Oh, it can't be. So you see, and
I see.
and if yeah, I like to say that to my students, because they go, well, and if one day we have to put the global workspace in the rubbish bin, I'll say thank you, global workspace, and so long. And that's, yeah. So maybe I'll have a little tear, but I don't know. I mean, you see what I mean? It's
I do.
really, and it's really important to emphasize also to the young generation that
Yeah.
you're not fighting for a model. It's just a like a bootstrap to your
Right.
mind, a limited mind. That
Yeah,
okay,
it
I
guides your
see it like
thinking to what
this.
you can
Yeah,
test.
yeah, exactly. And but it's true that I think also from my history, but also from being convinced by the evidence, it's true that I've mostly worked, and I tend to cast this framework of the global workspace on my interpretation of things.
Uh-huh. So
Perhaps.
can I just back up for a second? The
Yes.
paper you mentioned, is this the bifurcation dynamics paper, or is that a different one?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I want to ask you about that. So yeah, because I'm glad that you mentioned that it shows something partially wasn't carried out that you would have expected if the global workspace theory were true. But I want to, but there's some part of it that was sort of borne out. So it's an interesting result and an interesting experiment and a really cool paper. So I want to get to that. But I want to ask about what some of the things you were just saying, because it sounds like what you're saying is that you don't think that, or at least the kind of science that you would pursue isn't like model free or like just data. Like sometimes you meet scientists and they say, look, I don't do theories, I just collect data. And it sort of sounds like what you're saying is like, well, you can't make sense of what they're doing really if that's what they say they're doing. And I would agree with that. So I wonder if that's how you would, if you'd go that far.
So, okay, so you mean that so can you repeat your question?
Yeah, so that you were saying that without a model, you don't really know how to guide your thinking or like how to generate hypotheses or predictions so that, but sometimes you meet people who say that they aren't doing that, that the what they're doing is just collecting data and it's model free and it's not guided by that it's sort of theory neutral or something like that. And I've always been somewhat skeptical of that, that there is such a thing. Maybe the theorists themselves is not thinking about the theory, but they're being guided in some sense by what they find they should be testing, what's predictable, what isn't, right? I mean, so I thought that's what you were sort of saying, but maybe I was misunderstanding what you were saying.
No, that's true. On the other hand, on the other hand, you could find also very valuable work that is not having such a complex construction behind it.
Right.
Just like I mean, and maybe people that have this disposition would say, I'm without theory, just probing. This made me curious, and I wonder this or that without a big model behind that. But then I guess once you want to interpret your data, you're already making a mini model.
Yeah, exactly. I would say once you're even collecting the data, once
probably.
you design the experiment, you already have a model sort of in mind.
But I would not go as far as saying that if you're conducting experiments without a clear idea of the models you have behind that is useless. I would not say that.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean useless, but I meant that it's not technically true that you can collect data without some kind of, exactly.
You always have priors, even though you're not aware of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. That's a better way of putting it. Exactly. You have priors even if you're not explicitly aware of them. Because I think that's what's interesting. The last couple of years explicitly, I think, I mean, as a philosopher, you know, I like to see that. I feel like in the ASSC and the community there's been a kind of more awareness about theory questions about theory. How do we test specific theories instead of just confirming evidence, what falsified, and just generally questions about philosophy of science, which is good. So I'm very appreciative of this meta philosophical strand. So I want to ask about the global workspace more specifically. So there's two things I want to ask you. So first of all, I know you said that these are models, and I'm really glad to hear you say that you'd be happy to see it in the dustbin, or you wouldn't be happy, but you would, as a scientist, you would predict or expect that. Eventually, you may have to face that possibility. But do you think of the global workspace as like a psychologically real thing, which, you know, involves things like working memory? Some people have questioned whether working memory is even psychologically real, a natural kind, or so. I don't know exactly what to think. I think these are hard questions, but I'm just curious about is it just a model, or do you think we have reasons to map parts of this model onto actual psychologically real features of the mind?
So you mean psychological features or neurological features?
Yeah, both.
Both. Okay. Because so
because you might, I mean, the global workspace, sorry to cut you off right when you're about to say something, but the global workspace might be something that describes a possible psychology, but not human psychology. Maybe we don't work that way. Maybe AI would, but we don't. So there's a question about, does our mind actually work that way? And then secondly, if our mind's implemented by the brain, does the brain do it too? So I think they're related, obviously, but separate questions.
So, well, on the first point, my impression is that although the global workspace that was like proposed by Bars is an idea that's really strongly anchored into psychological research and about the functions of human mind,
right?
As well as some engineering approach into how you might be implementing these functions that use AI for thinking. That's the way I see it. But if you read Bars, it's very much psychological research of. And I know you've interviewed him recently.
Yeah, it's hard to get a straight
I'd like
answer.
to see. I haven't had the chance to see the interview, but
yeah. But I mean, he was inspired by. He says that he was explicitly inspired by like the work from AI, and so he was hanging out with some cognitive scientists and boxology and all that. But I guess so. So I don't know. So do you think that so obviously that, I mean, let me back up 5 steps. What do you see as the main difference between like the Stan DeHaan version of global neuronal workspace theory and the sort of quote unquote traditional Bars version? Are they different theories, or is the end just an implementation step, or do you think of them as distinct, saying different things? And how would you explain what they are saying? If you said.
Yes. Okay. So I might be mistaken, but I see two points of relationship. Well, the first one is I really do see the global neuronal workspace put forth by Stan DeHaan and Jean-Pierre Changeux as a proposition for a neuronal implementation of the main of Barr's main idea.
Okay.
That you have to so that you have to approach the problem from a functional point of view,
right?
And that in order to account for the specific functional properties of consciousness that we can observe, we need to assume that there is some sharing of information in a functional network. So I think Stan DeHaan's and Jean-Pierre Changeux model is just trying to propose an implementation of that. But then that leads them, and in their wake, other researchers like me to make perhaps even more specific predictions about dynamics, etc. More wet predictions, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And the other aspect that I would like to dive in is that when you read the Bars, it's much richer than just the proposition of the global workspace, because Bars proposes a hierarchy that goes up to the self that has not been touched upon at all in the global neuronal, or not that I know of, in the global neuronal workspace. So I think we're both inspired from the core global workspace proposition by Bars, but there's a big mine to be digging in as well, I think, in his propositions.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. In fact, when I talked with Bernie about that, he seemed to think that global broadcasting was like a necessary condition for experience or consciousness, but he didn't think that all by itself global broadcasting accounted for consciousness, because he says there has to be other systems that access that stream, like the self system, which then you start to say, well, that sounds like a different theory known as higher order theories. But it's so, yeah, I think that you're right, that's one of the key differences, is that the way that you guys have developed the theory is that the broadcasting itself seems to be necessary and sufficient. So that there is, but that was, I guess, should be my next question is, do you see it as sufficient all by itself, simply broadcasting, or is there some kind of accessing of the information, which is important on your way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I guess that's an excellent question, because, and I guess that's the main criticism to this idea that you can broadcast in a computer, you can broadcast in various systems, and if broadcast is sufficient, then okay, then we're back well, I guess that would go down to the same issue that IIT would have. Like, it's a property of communication that can be implemented
exactly,
in,
right.
in any like connected network. So why would it be so special? And
Right.
I think yeah, you're putting the finger on something that's exactly right. What's instrumental is that you assume broadcasting in an already functional network, in a functional manner.
Right.
So you're
Mhm.
but then I need to specify what I mean, and that's where I'm like I would have difficulty, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, that's where I would like to go now, is which is, what are the specific nodes of this global workspace that account for the functional properties of conscious access?
Uh-huh.
I don't think we've I think it's time now to understand that, especially in the context of this new step that we have, where we probe conscious processing in the absence of report, in the absence of task.
Right. No report
The
paradigm.
question comes back in a new form, and it means we really have to tackle what we mean by the key functional nodes for this workspace.
Right. I mean, so there's a lot there. I mean, one just I can't help because you're saying so many interesting things. I had a plan and now it's like I'm
Sorry.
no, it's just too interesting. But it's all there's so many nodes and connections. So when you say conscious access, I mean, one thing I wonder about is what you particularly mean by that, and whether you're using that word like as a code word to signal allegiance to like not Ned Block's interpretation of consciousness or something like that, or or what you mean by conscious access. So why don't you just talk about phenomenal consciousness and are reporting about it or something, as opposed to conscious access? So yeah, I am curious about it because that word shows up a lot in your work, and I just want to understand why you chose that phrase, I guess.
That's true. I think probably initially it was just a way to avoid the debate, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
And what's wrong with that? We want to do.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's also when you're writing an article, you don't you want to present results, but not get into an argument with
Exactly.
the viewers about things that are maybe outside of the scope of the article. So I guess that's the basic reason why I use it. It's true, but that's cool that you ask the question. Where's the phenomenal consciousness there? My impression, my intuition is that it comes with the package, like that. When so if it is true that conscious perception, let's talk about perception, because I mean, that's what is easy to study, and that's what I study. But conscious, I think, when if it's true that conscious perception is comes with the broadcasting of sensory informations to a functional network, then how can you imagine that it doesn't get to the valuation systems and to the emotional systems? So to me, it's that's something that was not touched upon by people working on the global workspace, because they were interested in complex tasks, and not asking about these emotional or value aspects of the processing. But I mean, one of the main functional roles of your brain is to evaluate whether what you're perceiving is good for you or not at that moment.
Right.
And and that also is conveyed by emotions and the evaluation system. And interestingly, this focus on limbic system and valuation systems comes from decision science.
Right.
I mean, the very science that is interested in reasoning, rational decisions, tells you, well, yeah, but decisions are made from a point of view, and that's where like, yeah, the self is getting in the basic sense, like, is it good for me or not? So for the moment, it's a big.
So it sounds like what you're saying.
A bit vague, but I do think that broadcasting, especially to the limbic system, might be a natural like bed for phenomenal consciousness. And yeah.
So this is broadcasting outside of the prefrontal cortex to
Well, I think the
like
prefrontal
hippocampal systems, or like what are you saying? Like limbic system is a term I think people, I don't know, are unhappy with nowadays. I don't know, but I'm not a neuroscientist. But do you mean like the dentate gyrus hippocampal structure and the amygdala and those sorts of things, broadcasting from the cortex to there, or from somewhere else to there, or like from everywhere to like what? So when you say broadcasting to there, I'm wondering where from and stuff.
Well, you see, that's where you that's where I hit my limits, because I definitely would like to become more knowledgeable on this system. So I'm only now, also because I'm getting away from the tasks in my experiment. I'm keen on looking more into like how the limbic system gets lighted up or not by a stimulus, and whether you get these phenomena of broadcasting or not. But okay, but my to the limit. Given my limited knowledge on the topic, it seems to me that the frontal cortex is very much linked with the limbic system and evaluation system in general.
It depends on which part of the frontal cortex, I think.
Yeah, or maybe ventral.
Ventral medial, but dorsal, like the frontal pole, I don't think it's a lot of direct input.
Yeah, but that's interesting then. Because, for example, it seems, but we still need to investigate that, but it seems that when we contrasted becoming conscious of the same information with and without a task, you have some part of the frontal cortex that cease to be involved, but others that needs to be still needs to be confirmed, but others seem to still be involved.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So because I mean I'm getting ahead of ourselves here, and that's fine. But because I'm trying to understand. You're talking about all your interesting work that you're doing, and I want to talk about it too. But I'm still trying to like understand the way you think about the global workspace theory. And what it says, and because I never really have honestly understood what it means when something's, I mean, there's this word you guys use, mobilize into the workspace. And I'm like, I'm not sure what that means neurologically speaking. Like there are some neurons that fire, then they're connected to some other neurons that fire. So what has been mobilized into the workspace is the pattern of like what? I mean, so there's no thing that has been moved into the workspace at the neural level, or do you think that there is like something that can be interpreted as a representation or something that literally is like broadcasted? So that's what one of the things I guess I don't really understand, like at the nuts and bolts levels, like what does it mean to broadcast? Because for example, my background is like I did some wet work and I worked in animals in grad school, but very briefly looking at long range connections between the dentate gyrus and the cortex, and we were looking for synchrony to sort of confirm LTP and things of that nature. But there, the sense of broadcasting makes sense to me, because what you have is a bunch of neurons that are firing, they get entrained into a theta rhythm, And then they sort of all start firing in the theta rhythm, and then you can make sense of what it means for that information to be carried on the theta cycle or whatever. But is that the sort of thing that you mean when you talk about broadcasting? Or not you, but I mean the global workspace theorists? Because it doesn't see, I don't see that kind of nuts and that sort of like what's happening in the spike chain level when you move something into the workspace. Is this not a good question or the wrong question?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I mean, we need to specify what is meant by a broadcast.
Yeah.
So, and what you're
so like,
saying.
do you agree with like the Edvard Mosier and the like, theta broadcasts and trade, like that whole kind of picture of broadcasting, or are you guys working with a different notion that's yet to be specified in terms of the mechanism at the neuronal level?
Well, I think that you can have these kind of communication or synchrony. So I do think that synchrony is the communication mode across regions.
Right.
But I guess this can exist also for unconscious processing.
Right, exactly. Like unconscious percepts are bound together, and synchrony probably has something to do with that.
Yes, although there are some indications that probably becoming conscious of a stimulus, or at least having attention on a stimulus, helps link different aspects,
right? So
different levels of representation of the stimulus, which I think is true.
Right.
But then I think. Yeah, I think it's a cool question, because that's in these details that we can examine the robustness of the proposition or not.
Right.
So what I think this global broadcast mean is that there are some, maybe the attentional system, that some systems that represent a bottleneck, and that at this level there will be competitions between the influence of various sensory representations, and that the winning representation, and that's very Barr's view, that's very much Barr's view, the winning representation, the one that, if you want, maybe it's better to say that influences the target regions most, will then be gated to other possibilities. So maybe it's a bit of a caricature, but let's assume that you have competing visual representations. They are getting to the attentional system, let's say in the parietal cortex. And one is, for some reason, for the task or for yourself, more interesting than the other, or wins the competition. And winning the competition is also, I guess, a coupling between attentional regions and sensory regions. Then the idea is that this opens the gate to several other systems, including language systems, even if it's a visual stimulus that is not directly connected to language areas. This opens up a communication channel to other functional systems that will make the processing of this information more memorable and more flexible, and stabilize the system around this representation. But obviously this representation is not going to be the same at the sensory level and at the other levels, but the influence, we can trace back the influence of this specific representation to the functional system that is responding.
Uh-huh. So would it be wrong to say that, to summarize what you said, is that being in the global workspace means there are representations in these various systems that causally trace back to this representation in the cortex? Because
yeah,
I mean,
so.
or is it more than that? Because what I'm thinking is that there's two pictures. One picture is like it's information, not states, right? Not states in terms of the brain. So let's imagine that there's 6 neurons, and representing that there's something out there involves these 3 neurons firing in pattern N. So these 3 neurons firing in pattern N is the representation of some property in the external environment, a line, whatever. Okay, whatever. So now that thing needs to get in the global workspace. This representation, we would say, goes in the global workspace. So what does that mean? That the information goes in the global workspace? So this state stays here. These neurons firing in that pattern stay there. But then the information is copied or something? Or is it rather that somehow those systems get connected to this state, and that state influences what they do, but there's not a representation up there which is doing something which this thing caused, and that's doing the work. So those seem to me to be sort of 2 different ways of specifying what you mean. And I've heard people say both, actually, it seems like.
That's true. I would rather, I mean, your second proposition seems much more to make much more sense neurophysiologically.
Right, right. And that's why I'm not trying, this isn't an ambush or anything. I'm just trying to get clear on the theory, because that does seem like, yeah, one is like very computational, there's information, and one is very like biological, like there's something. So there's a big difference, I think, in the way people are thinking about what the global workspace theory is.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Yeah, but that's a good point. I'm not sure. Yeah, you're a philosopher. You know where to put your finger so that it's it's a nerve.
Yeah, I don't mean to. I'm just trying to understand. Sorry, I just want to know.
You know, we're sharing that.
Well, I mean, what some people tell me when I ask these questions is, I don't care. I just like the data. Here's some data. Let's talk about the experiment. And you could tell me that, and I would move on. But you know.
No, I like to hit that nerve.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So, but the problem is I'm not sure. I mean, actually, I do realize that I'm not sure that the first proposition, like the representation is sent to another area, makes physiological sense. I don't think so. I mean, different areas do process information. They don't just acknowledge or re-represent. But that's my view. And yeah. And I think also,
so I mean, do you think that part of the problem here is that we don't really know what all the spiking and neurons and things like that, what they're, I mean, we talk a lot about them doing stuff, but we don't really, I'd say, you know, what I tell them, I teach intro to neuroscience for non-science majors at my college. It's like a general ed class. And one of, you know, so you try to tell them about neural representations. What's the best thing we can say is like synchrony, and then intensity of spike firing trains. Like, you know, you press really hard, you press lightly, and then you get some rate code, like, and then you kind of say, okay, now take that and extrapolate to everything. It's like, how do you do that? Well, I don't think we're really at the point where we like can say all those, what that stuff means, or even a spike trains, or someone's in the chat asking about neural tubules. And it's like, I don't know, like how, like, what do you think about like glial cells and spike, like in the neuroscience of 100 years, are glial cells going to be the star and we're going to be like, glial cells, or like, is it still going to be spike trains? Like, I just don't, like, if you look at the long range of science, it's interesting to think about 1,000 years from now, whether they will laugh at us like the way we laugh at Aristotle, which is something I'm constantly worried about.
Yes. Oh no, they won't be. I mean, but why not? But we would anyway be the ones who led them to where they are.
Sure. Yeah, we'll say that. Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, I see what. Okay, I see what you mean. Like the brain representing something. We're not even at it yet. We're not understanding that yet.
Well, still, I guess part of my question, and I see Matthias is in the chat as well, asking, sort of a similar question to what I was asking. I think he's asking it better, like he usually does. But what I'm trying to get at is whether you think we can like tell the difference right now between these two ways I put the global workspace hypothesis. Like, so all the same stuff would be lighting up and blah, blah, blah. But one interpretation is there's information which is being sent. Now the information is over there and there's a representation now which is doing stuff. The other one is no, there's just this coupling and there's, but one's, so which one are we looking at? Can we tell, do you think?
Okay. Well, spontaneously, I would say number 2, no hesitation. But I'm saying that realizing that I always use the wordings of number 1.
Okay.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. But if I think physiologically, I think, the number 2, it makes a lot of sense. It's right. Not sending some information. It's just having, having some communication. So, like influencing the way representations are changing in area B, right. Thanks to
so like conceptually, it would be almost more like channels of water that are flowing, which you could divert into different paths to move things around, rather than something computational, something what you would just, because it sounds like what you described, something more mechanistic. It's just there's pathways that are opening up and things are flowing now in this way, but not really moving from one place to another. It's just now there's this path that exists between that thing here and that thing there, but not a new representation of this thing over there, which is what Matthias is asking. He's saying, do you believe that sensory representations are re-represented? And I think what you're saying is not just simply re-represented, that they cause things up there, which maybe are representations, but not re-representations.
Yeah, I think they cause things up there, and they block other things up there. I think the competition aspect is occurring as well. And I think from the representation, how the brain represents things topic, I think we're moving up nicely now with current experiments, like beautiful experiments, obviously in the hippocampus, looking at much more complex patterns than the sparse coding observations that were made in the visual cortex, and and also recent studies that show that representations, notably in higher levels such as prefrontal cortex, do evolve during the course of a task, from something that is directly readable as like probably resembling the sensory input, and then it seems that the role of this area is just to cast it to another plane, which is the decision plane. So I think I would look at this literature to shape my understanding of what is this broadcast. And I think what is this broadcast is strength of influencing in various areas, but obviously when you send to area B, it's doing its job. It's not re-representing. It would not mean anything, I think.
Right. So, I mean, part of the reason why I think this matters, and people, and Matthias asking in the chat sort of question where I was leading, hopefully to, was because it matters for this current like craze or fad of decoding, which I think people are getting. I love multivariate pattern analysis, and actually one of the things that's so cool about your new paper, tons of cool, but is the MVP on ERP, which I hadn't seen before. So I don't know if that's new or how new it is, but I've done a little bit of ERP work, but I didn't even dream of like multivariate pattern. That's like a cool idea. So anyway, I want to ask you about that, but not right now. I know I'm being very annoying. I'm sorry. But the reason that this matters though is because there's a lot of like, enthusiasm for testing predictions of these theories. And some people say decoding is a way to go. And some people have said global workspace theories are committed to decoding from content of conscious experience from prefrontal cortex. So one thought I had was like the way you're putting things now, you still could get a kind of decoding if you knew what these causal relationships were, but it wouldn't be a decoding of the content of conscious experience from the prefrontal cortex. It would be a decoding of the indirect measure of the thing with down there, and which is conscious or something like that on this view, right? So I guess that's another way of asking the question of which state is the conscious experience state on the view, the ones that are caused or the ones that's doing the causing?
Both.
Both.
Yes, because it's the dynamical relationship that puts you in the state where your brain is mostly influenced by that, and your psychological function and perhaps your behavior is mostly influenced by this information.
Right.
So,
But so
and it's true that often we're tempted to actually get away from the workspace idea by saying, well, everything is sent to the prefrontal cortex, and that's exactly the kind of thing that Bars wanted to avoid with the idea of global workspace. That's a negation of global workspace to say things are sent to the homunculus, a prefrontal homunculus. That's exactly what Bars actually tried to get around, because that's a problematic way of seeing things functionally. So
are you saying that these two states are really one complex state? Or are you saying that there are two mental states, two states of the mind which are conscious or that make a contribution to the conscious? Or do you think this is the wrong way of talking about it? Is the person?
I think it's a single state. Yeah.
So the broadcasting, the content that is broadcasted and the receiving of the content that is broadcasted are one continuous state / process on this view.
Well, probably then, now that you force me to specify, I would say you're not sending a content, you're creating another content that is that's connected to the initial one. And also, and what's interesting also is I think that there are episodes in the stream of consciousness, and that it's not a snapshot, that we can identify some homogeneous consciousness episodes around an initial cause that will lock into this state and then evolve until we're done with the thing, and then we're moving on to another one. But I think within each becoming conscious of an information, we are in a dynamical state. But yeah, I think also one interesting aspect that's emerged with the proposition of neuronal implementation of the workspace is this focus on the dynamics that has led us to observe and then theorize that there is this bifurcation.
Right.
There is such a thing as, yes, now I can tell you that it's this representation that is mostly influential in the brain. Now I can tell you, but then I don't think that there's one moment in time where you're conscious. I think it's an episode. It's but I think there is an entry point because of the bifurcation phenomena.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, because it does seem like then a lot of people have been thinking of how you might test this, the ideas that you have in the wrong way. Like some of the stuff that allegedly is trying to test this theory wouldn't be testing it. Like, could you decode content from the PFC alone versus could you decode it from the sensory cortices, isn't a question that's going to really address the sort of theory that you are talking about right now, right? Is that really the upshot of this?
Well, at least, yeah, if you're trying to test the global workspace, you need to test the connections.
Right.
I'm saying that, but I'm not testing connections, for example, in the last papers. But
yeah, exactly. Well, no, actually, in the last paper, you're establishing that there's this dissociation, or trying to establish that there's this dissociation, this bifurcation, which is an important aspect of the theory. And I promise we are going to. Not just kidding. We are going to get to it. So yeah, this is so interesting because I'm learning a lot, and I really value you taking your time to explain this to me and help me understand it, because I do feel like this isn't the picture that I got from reading. And I have made it. I mean, I read Stan's book. I've read your papers. And I don't really feel like I was. I'm not saying you weren't saying this. I'm just saying I wasn't. It wasn't what I was picking up. So this is changing my mind about how I think about the global workspace theory, which is good.
I think you're actually. I mean, it's cool to have this conversation. You're making me say explicitly these things that I do realize I think, and I've never said explicitly, actually.
Yeah, time for a book from you, Clara. That's what it sounds like to me. But that's really cool. So someone is asking, like, Queerdo, is that how you say your name? I don't know, in the chat, how you became convinced of the global working space. And you did mention that you sort of thought there was evidence that personally, that you thought that this was, like, of the theories of consciousness, maybe the one that's the best we have right now would be a way to put it, or closest to what you think is capturing something important. So I wonder, like, I know, is it, could I venture the guess that, is it the general idea that, you know, when we do the contrastive method, that we find this dissociation, late activity from people when they see it, early activity when they say they don't see it, that's in common with when they, so is it that general line of reasoning which has convinced you, or is there something else, change blindness, or what overall, just everything being presented, or is there specific things which kind of led you to go, yeah, that's the thing that's leading me?
I think, okay, so I think there are some theoretical aspects that really convince me, and there are some empirical results that really convinced me. From the theoretical part, I'm absolutely convinced, at least by the approach, and it made so much sense to me when I read Barr's book. The approach to say, okay, consciousness is a word of human language that is aiming at a functional property, and let's describe this functional property and then get back to what's making this. I think it's very compelling. So I'm very much into trying to not break this chain of understanding.
Right.
From the neural underpinnings you're trying to find, and the functional properties you're trying to describe. But it's true that it has led us to focus too much on tasks. And it's cool that people that view things differently had tell us, okay, but then you're just describing task processing. But still, this does not deter me from saying, I'm not buying your theory if you're telling me, if you're not showing me the link between your neurophysiological description and a functional property that appears in psychological terms. That's a personal conviction.
Yeah. So can I just stop you for a second, real fast? So, because at the beginning of this, and I want to get to the empirical reasons that convince you in a second, but at the beginning of this, you mentioned that part of the idea was that, you know, that the global workspace makes sense because consciousness is all interconnected in this way. And, you know, it's not just isolated perception and then emotion over here. It's like emotional perception and perceptual emotion, and like it's all mixed, and workspaces sharing information makes sense of that idea. Is that part of the common sense appeal that you're talking about right now? Or is that something else? The intuitive appeal, I mean, the idea that it captures this idea that there's this vast interconnection of experience, which you would expect.
No, I think No, I'm not sure. I think that it mirrors or reflects.
Phenomenology.
I don't like the way of just making analogies. Like, for example, when I was never really convinced by some arguments about uh, linking different features of a stimulus. You know, how do you create a percept of a like of a blue phone, a blue rectangle. Oh no, you can't see
You
it.
can't see it, no. We can see your glasses though. Just use a
But okay, yeah. How do you create the concept link black with the shape of my etc. So that's an old psychological concept, and I was never convinced by just the argument of saying, look, we see that there can be synchrony between different modules, and we're trying to psychologically we are trying to understand how these two properties are linked. Synchrony looks like a link, so that's the basis, and that's just an analogy. And I think we need to that's a good start, but explaining is not just finding analogies.
right.
I think so. You
Yeah,
need
but then because the reason why I ask is because so suppose so like I could agree with you. I mean, I'm somewhat skeptical of this idea, but I could agree with you that we want to do something functional, like what you were saying. We don't want this continuity. We'll lose the continuity with this way science is done, functionalizing things, looking for the mechanisms that implement those functions, etc. But then why there to global workspace as opposed to there to recurrent processing, which I take it is also a functional notion, or higher order representation, which is also sometimes or any other functional notion. Why global workspace as the functional notion? That was the,
yeah.
That's what I thought the connection stuff one might be addressing, which is why I asked that question. Like why, if you agree with you at that starting point, what leads you from there specifically to the global workspace version of a functional theory of consciousness?
Yes. Okay. So I think my my reasoning would be different if we're discussing local recurrence versus discussing higher order theory.
Okay.
So for local recurrence, it has some functional role, but it seems to draw the line between unconscious and conscious a bit too low for me. So from what I see, and this theory raises from beautiful neurophysiological work about the role of recurrent processing into building up percepts in or representations that really match the reported percepts. So that's true. Still, I think these there are some building evidence that these recurrencies can occur even when people deny having being conscious of the stimulus. And I think that's the most problematic part of this proposition, which has led some people to say that when a hemi-neglect patient that is shown a face in his or her neglected field and denies seeing the face, well, if we see that the face is still lighting up fusiform face area, then this person is phenomenally conscious of the stimulus. Then that's where the breach to functional is to me, and I can't. I think then you're speaking about another type of consciousness that I would spontaneously speak about. If someone, I mean, to me, the person having the conscious percept has the final authority on what is consciously perceived.
Right.
So that's, I think that's very problematic. I think there are lots of evidence that you can have local recurrence and unconscious processing. But that's just, I think, the level where you draw the line.
Yeah. So just really quickly to clear something up, someone, Queerdo, the same person in the comments, is asking, he keeps interpreting what you're saying as invoking some kind of metacognitive state or something. And it's not, I mean, yeah, that word, metacognition is a word that's so abused. I don't really like it anymore. But there's a sense in which what you're talking about is metacognitive, because there's access to all these systems, cognitive systems. That's kind of meta in a sense, but it's not metacognitive in the traditional sense, right? That, I mean, we agree that you're not invoking some kind of metacognitive
yeah, not necessarily, but it's true that that's something I'm not completely settled about. It's true.
But at least the kind of consciousness you're talking about isn't metacognitive consciousness. Like, you're not talking about being, because that's the higher order stuff, if anything, right? That you're aware of these states or something like that. Or so if metacognition is involved in some sense, it's not like that kind of stuff.
No,
that you're talking about. Yeah.
No, I don't. No, I think it's more basic in a way.
Yeah.
But I mean, my intuition is that these mechanisms that helps the system to lock into a semi-stable state have allowed the evolution of more complex and refined functions such as metacognition.
Right.
You need to settle the system on a specific content, so as to allow the emergence of more complex functions.
Right. There's got to be cognition before metacognition.
Yeah, that's well put.
Yeah. So look, because I want to get clear on what you're saying about what I interpret as phenomenological overflow, the Ned Block kind of argument that there could be phenomenally conscious states which you can't access, or at least aren't accessing at the moment. And Victor Lama, recurrent processing theorist, is well known for defending a version of that. And I think what you were just giving was an objection to that way of thinking, saying it severs the connection with functionalizability that you think is useful. And I'm thinking you have in mind something like the Cohen and Dennett maybe style paper argument in intrinsic cognitive science. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but so they think that, you know, they're basically just arguing for, you're saying that if you're going to do science, it's got to be functionalizable. So if you're going to say there's something that's not functionalizable, then it's outside the realm of science or something like that.
Yeah.
But so, all right. So I wonder if on your own global workspace view, you could have a version of if it could empirically be found out that there was something like this. So suppose that you were convinced of global workspace theory, like you maybe are, but even more convinced, like we had some really good, we tested it, we had reason to think it was actually, like, you know, probably true, or like the best model we have. Then suppose you say you identify with phenomenal, conscious access, whatever word you want to use, experience, whatever, with global workspace dynamic GW, to call it G. No, that's in general intelligence, so we don't want to do that. Just call it, you know, whatever. Call it, I don't care, X. So then you find X when people say that they don't see the thing. Did you falsify the global workspace theory?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That was easy, because I would have thought that you would have said no. I would have become convinced that there's consciousness without access.
Okay, but no. I mean, well, it depends. What's your final object? If your final object is to describe what's behind this. What's behind this word of human language? Maybe we understand this word differently, but if my goal is to understand what's behind this this word of human language, you're conscious. If you deny that you're conscious of X and or of Y and your X
whatever. Yeah, exactly. I know I put it too abstractly. I know.
If you tell me and I have no good reason to think that you're lying to me, then I mean, I have every reason to throw away my model instead of your report. I mean, no.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, even if you had like, you know, in every other case, the model had made successful predictions, withstood falsification, and then you became generally convinced that, yes, this is sort of on the right track. And then you found out this happens.
Okay, so how many times
yeah, I know. You have to really pile it on.
Neurological patient.
I just want, because it does seem to me, to be an empirical issue, but what it sounds like you're saying is no, it's a conceptual issue. So what I'm trying to get at is whether it's a conceptual or an empirical issue. That's really what the game I was trying to play is like, could there be any empirical evidence that would convince someone like you that, yeah, there was something that you experienced, that there was something that it was like for you to state to be in, but you didn't know about it. I don't know. There's something behind me right now. I don't know what color it is. I can look. So it doesn't seem conceptually confused to think that it's got a color before I look. So I don't know. So I'm not asking because I have an agenda. I'm literally on the fence. I don't know which way to go here. I'm just curious what you think.
Okay. I think I get your point. So, I mean, it makes sense. Then we reach another age in my view where data has brought you more than you expected, because you've reached, and I think that's in a way what Lame thinks he's at.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Where data have shown you an interesting difference that does not show up in language in an obvious way.
Exactly. And that's what he writes his paper saying.
And then we will come into the real history of our investigation, where we'll have to use terms that don't come from naive psychology.
Right.
But then nobody will be able to say the flag, this is consciousness. No, this is consciousness. Well, these are, so maybe then we'll have to adopt the P and the A, or
like what you're saying,
then specify what's the connection with the spontaneous word of consciousness.
Right.
But
so the spontaneous, now, see, I think I've been misunderstanding slightly what you meant when you said spontaneous, because it sounds like what you're saying is like naive psychology. Philosophers would call that, like folk psychology, or just like the way we think about the mind before we have to revise it by doing science or something like that. And what you're saying, and what I'm liking when I hear it, is that to do science, we got to start with the naive psychology, because that's the thing we're investigating. That's the thing we're interested in. That's where we're here. So if we're led to abandon that thing by doing science, then you get into a real pickle, because you have to ask yourself, could I start by studying something that's right over there and then find out it doesn't exist? Or should I stick with the thing that I knew at the beginning and say, okay, well then this can't be a good theory of it. And that's a real tough philosophical question. So I think that's an interesting way of putting it.
But I think it's really helpful to think about something that's almost done, which is explaining life.
Right.
I mean, at some point we know that there's no, one single, there are different levels of explaining life that are very conceptually very different, all interconnected. So I think it really helps looking ahead for these big topics like consciousness.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Okay, so I see my usual tendency to ramble on has led us to the point where we've been here for a long time and we haven't got to talk about your cool work. I've been really enjoying this conversation, but I want to really talk about this bistable dynamics paper. You have so many interesting papers. So maybe someday I'll come back and we'll just go through all your actual empirical work. But I do want to get your opinion about this dynamics, the bifurcation dynamics paper. So can you just give us an idea about what you were doing and how you set up the experiment, what you thought you were going to find and what you did, how it worked out?
Okay, yes. So I think it dates back to one of the first week of my PhD a long time ago.
Wow, cool. I love it when those long-term projects come to fruition after so many years. Yeah, it's awesome.
So we were having lunch with Stan Dehan, who just started to be my supervisor, and Liz Spelke, who's a very good friend of him. And she was asking him, but Stan, well, when you speak about your theory, you always seem to think that there are two very different processing styles, the unconscious and the conscious one. You seem to consider that there is a frontier, etc. And he said, yes, obviously. And I said, maybe we can test that because I was really struck by the fact that you can use scales to ask people to rate their pain, and that they would use it really, consistently, etc. And I said, oh, maybe we can test whether there is a gradient there using a scale. Why not try? And that's what was really cool with being a PhD student with Stan Dehan. And he said, oh, cool, yeah, let's do that, and I'll give you all you need to do that, etc. And that's okay, and that's where it really started as a topic instead of just a common way of speaking about the things. Can we find a separation? And I know there are other traditions that really tried to know whether there's a separation or not, notably in signal detection theory, where they decided, well, for the moment, we consider that there's no separation. But anyway, and we started to investigate that in the attentional blink, and it seemed that at least in the attentional blink, when people were shown the same stream of stimulation, but on some trials they would tell us, I've seen it, and on some trials they would tell us, no, I haven't seen it. On the scale, we could see like really two groups of trials, although they were only repetition of the same stimulus.
Right.
The two groups of responses, sometimes they would say, yeah, there was nothing. And sometimes they say, oh, yeah, I've seen it quite well. And then in the brain, we could see a big difference between these two types of trials with the same external stimulation. And it echoes lots of other psychological experiments that do not directly tackle that. Okay, but that was in the attentional blink. And then in the meantime, I had started studying patients with disorders of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And you can't do attentional blink experiments with these people. And I thought, okay, but then other colleagues had other experiments with masking, etc., that seemed to indicate also that they would find bifurcations in these kind of experiments. And I thought, okay, it's and notably Antoine Delcul and Sid Quider, etc. And I thought, okay, so maybe if in the end, if you take your proposition seriously, then first you can find bifurcations with very simple stimuli. And second, that means that you should find it with auditory stimuli that you can use in patients.
Right,
So
across modalities, right? That's the key
yeah,
idea.
across modalities. So I thought, okay, if you take this seriously, that could be a very interesting tool for probing patients. And we need to see whether that generalizes to audition, generalizes to simple stimuli. And the idea behind the protocol was also that this protocol could be then adapted to the patients. And that's what we're doing now.
Very
So,
cool.
yeah. And
I've seen some of that work. It's really awesome, by the way. So.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And so that's that was the start of this experiment. And around the same time, I was attending the ASSC at Paris. And now Tsugo Tsuchiya and others were making the argument that in the end, if we wanted to find the neural signature of consciousness, we needed to show it in the absence of a task and in the absence of a report. And I said, okay, that's definitely the right step to go from healthy, awake, responding volunteers to patients that are not going to respond to me, but I still want to read out whether they are conscious.
Right.
And so I want healthy volunteers responding, healthy volunteers not making any task, to see what's common between the two, and then go to the patients. And
right.
that's how we came to this protocol, where we use very simple stimuli and people and auditory stimuli. So so you're listening to a continuous noise like this, and within that noise you will have a or the French vowels, because these were French participants. So by the way, this signature of consciousness only applies to French people. That's important to understand that. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. I almost took you serious for a second. You got me. I was like, oh,
yeah,
wow.
That was just to wake you up. So
it worked.
They were listening to these vowels in noise, and the same participant came once for a session where they told me, yeah, I hear A or E, and how well have you heard it, etc. And on another session, they heard the same thing, but instead of rating how well they heard the stimulus, they had quiz questions, etc. They were not doing a task on the stimulus. Right. And we had a full range of stimulus intensity, so that we could probe the response function of the brain to external stimulation under task or no task.
And this was all done with EEG though, so that they weren't in a scanner or anything like that.
No, that was done in EEG. Also, still having in mind what a technique that we could easily implement in patients, and that's right. And with EEG, we wanted to look at the response function of the brain to these stimuli, and what we did in this experiment is really to specify the dynamical model that we meant when we were talking about bifurcation, because in previous papers it was a bit qualitative. We were saying, oh, you see, there's a disruption in the functional response, etc. Here we really wanted to specify what we meant by a model, so that we could also fit the data to the models. And so what's particularly new in this article is that specifying the model has led us to acknowledge that in order to demonstrate that there is or there is not a bifurcation in dynamics between processing the same information unconsciously or consciously. In order to prove that, we cannot only rely on averaging the signal across trials.
Right.
Because if you want to see a bifurcation, so that for exactly the same stimulation, sometimes you're here, sometimes you're there, it will show up in the variability of activity across trials. So that's
is that a way of saying like P300 based research is like not going to get at what you're looking at, or like anything based on traditional ERP stuff for the average trials?
Well, it could, for example, in way back in our initial attentional blink paper, when we sorted out trials according to the response of the participants, when they said that they had seen the stimulus, we would see a P300. When they say they have not seen a stimulus, we would see no P300. Okay, that seemed compelling, but that's not, I mean, it could still be an effect of averaging, indeed, as you say. So in the end, if you want to prove that there are two groups, you have to look at individual trials and see whether indeed it arises spontaneously from the distribution of trials that there are two groups of trials.
Right, exactly. So you have to see if that, so is the strategy that you use was you trained a pattern analysis thingamabob on the data and see if it could sort the trials in the seen and unseen versus given the data that is that what you did? Is that the way it worked?
Yes. So yeah, so there are two stages. First, we did multivariate pattern analysis, but a very classical one. Classical.
From the early 2000s, yeah, you know, yes, classical period. Exactly.
But okay, standard, just to have a summary of the activity that was reflected the stimulus. So we're just doing a multivariate pattern analysis to summarize the activity related to the stimulus. And so we classify stimulus was presented versus not presented. Okay, so that's the multivariate part. And now we have a summary of the activity at each time point after the stimulus for each trial, and then we fit our model, and we ask the data, trial by trial data. We ask, do you look like this? And so this would be this would be X would be different levels of the stimulation,
right?
And here I would plot the activity. So bifurcation dynamics would be okay when the stimulus is really low, you only have just baseline activity. When you're at threshold, you have two possible levels. Okay. And when you're well above threshold here, you only have one possible level. You're conscious every time. Okay.
Right.
So that's one model. The other model is like this. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Continuous.
Okay. And we're fitting the two models. We're looking at which is explaining trial data best. And we see that this one is explaining the data best in the early phase up to 300 milliseconds. This one seems to appear after 250 milliseconds. Okay, so that's the first observation. And
so is that evidence that the global workspace gets going at that time, at 250 milliseconds? Because that seems earlier than what I've heard other people say.
Okay. Well, that matches what we observed during the attentional blink as well. But I think also it's also very possible that depending on the modality or the type of stimuli, you're able to trigger these mechanisms earlier or later.
I see.
I don't think we can really commit to a specific timing.
I mean, like some people have tried to argue against the global workspace on the basis of like timing of consciousness, basically. And it sounds like what you're saying is we can't really do that yet.
No, and I think both Lucia Meloni and Aru and Lionel Nakache and I, and probably many others have argued in this direction that when you're splitting activity according to whether the subjects tell you that they were conscious of the stimulus or not, you will see differences that can be even before the stimulus, because you will capture whatever influenced whether you're going to become conscious of the stimulus or not. So you're capturing all the neural correlates of consciousness, but these correlates can be precursors of consciousness. Right. So that's when you're approaching the problem in this way, sorting out according participants' report. I think it's great. It has helped us make great advances, but you can't make a strong argument on the moment where it appears, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. It's so cool. But so isn't like one of the surprising findings is that, so you do have evidence for these bifurcations, but not where you thought they would be? Or is it too strong to say you were surprised by where they were?
You mean, okay, yes. So you mean when you have no task?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the way I understand your paper is what you did is you did it when you're doing the task, you did it when you're not doing the task, and then you try to subtract in method and see what's left over, basically. And,
yes.
And then you found, it's like in these areas that maybe are somewhat surprising from the point of view of the global workspace theory. I don't know, but
yeah, that's true. So actually, I was so excited when I saw the data because I have to say I was for once I was quite agnostic about what would happen in the absence of a task. So in the presence of the task, we do see first these negativity. The bifurcation seems to correspond like first to negativity and then the P300. It's an obvious one, like you have a nice big positivity here. Okay, no surprise. And then in the absence of a task, I can remember when the student came back with the topographies, the P300 was completely abolished. And but bummer. No, that's cool. That's so cool because it's not like just it disappeared. There was something else, and I thought that's amazing. I would not have put my how do you say in English, my hand into fire or whatever.
Yeah, you wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that. Actually, we still see late activity, although people have nothing to do on the stimulus. We still see activity between 300 and 500, even 600 milliseconds after the stimulus, although people have nothing to do on the stimulus.
Right.
That's when they become conscious. That's for the stimuli that are way above threshold, that we know that they spontaneously become conscious of the stimulus. So I thought, wow, that's cool. So there is something like spontaneous late activity, even if you really don't care about the stimulus. So
right. So that debunks the whole line of argument that spontaneous late activity is solely the result of task performance reporting demands, all that. There's some component that isn't related to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And but also that debunks the idea that P300 can be a signature of consciousness. I think it's a signature of consciousness plus articulating that to executive system for the execution of a task.
I mean,
And
when I was a student, but way back when, P300 was like the oddball. Yeah, it's like
yeah,
you get a P300 when you notice a difference. So clearly, it seems already obviously sort of associated with something
yeah,
else.
exactly, exactly. But that's also the history of how we constructed these experiments, that it
Right.
became rather associated more generally with conscious processing. But indeed, that's the defining of the P300 was the oddball, and
Right.
and it was a difference between two stimuli that were
Both conscious.
conscious, that were both conscious. So indeed, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I always found that weird because I was like, why? How did this ever get like where it came from? Is sort of odd. Anyway, so that's interesting. But so now, where do you find the bifurcation, like neuroatomically? Where is the interesting bifurcation in this task
Yeah.
specifically for the
Well,
French people?
the thing, yeah, for the French people, I'm only speaking.
Us Americans, we do it different. All right, I just want you to know.
Okay. So
I'm
speaking
kidding.
in the name of my people, we come in peace.
Yeah,
But that's where
exactly. Hey, we only eat freedom fries. Yesterday was the 4th. All right. I'm joking.
right. So so that's EG.
Uh-huh.
So so that really needs to be backed up by experiments in fMRI, and that's what we're trying to build up now.
But you did do some localization of EEG
yes,
stuff,
yes.
right?
So
Okay,
that's
no.
EG source reconstruction.
Right.
That's what I meant. So source reconstruction in EG needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, because you have to make assumptions to get at a solution.
Right.
So
It's gotten a lot better in the last 15 years or so, I'd say, I think.
Yes, but when you're doing it, I'm giving you an insider's information. When you're doing it, you see that you can tweak parameters. You see that you can feel that indeed some parameters will influence your result in one way or another, so that you can feel the fragility of what you're looking at.
Right.
But okay, that said, you can, I think it can give you a rough idea, but a very rough idea. And if we
But you guys did intracranial too, right? I thought I read that there was some.
So we're currently doing it, but we haven't published it yet.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, intracranial and intracranial, we already have some data, but then, I mean, the electrodes are not necessarily in all the areas we'd like to probe.
Right. Yeah.
And then we'd like to do fMRI as well. But
yeah, by the way, Claire, when can we do full cortex ECOG? We're waiting for that. Electrodes on the whole cortex.
You want to be the first one?
Yeah, right. Exactly. No thanks.
And actually, and that's true. That's a difference of the French or the European. We have like depth electrodes, and you have ECOG, surface ECOG.
I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But right. So but for the EG source, for what it's worth, the EG source reconstruction in this study seemed to indicate that the focus of the difference between the late activity with the task and without a task was mainly executive area and actually motor, premotor, supplementary motor areas. So it made a lot of sense. Okay.
Right.
We're not sure. Okay. And
but does it make a sorry to interrupt you. I see doing that a lot lately. I'm sorry, but does it make a lot of sense from the phenomenological point of view that the experience that the person is having of seeing the things or whatever, hearing, I guess in this case, the things, is primarily SMA and motor cortex. That seems like
no, I mean,
is this a different? Am I confusing what thing you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Let me specify. So if you look at what's different when you not only become conscious of a stimulus, but you have a task to do on the stimulus.
I see. Then you see the SMA and
planification, motor planification. Okay. But in both cases, so that's what we're trying to argue in the paper. Maybe when you become spontaneously aware of a stimulus with no task to do on the stimulus, what happens is the appearance of a global playground. Mm-hmm. So a global playground would be this phenomenon of locking into a stable state for a moment around a specific representation, but for no specific purpose, mm-hmm. Not articulating this to motor planning, notably.
Oh, I see. So that's the playground. So it's just for fun. It's not doing any work. It's not in the workspace. It's just playing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. And then if you add some task and you articulate this episode with the necessity to take a decision and to have a behavior related to this information, then you have a workspace. But maybe the workspace is a playground with some added modules that helps you execute the task.
Yeah, interesting. And that global playground, if based on what you have right now, it's not in the prefrontal cortex. It seems like in the parietal cortex or another area.
Yeah, it's true. Although you notice that we emphasize some frontal sides.
Yeah, the insula, is that the one?
But that's, yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, again, I think okay, I'm just curious to see what comes out from fMRI.
Right.
With this approach. But I mean, that links us to the prefrontal debate.
Right, exactly.
My guess is that, I mean, this enormous part of our brain, if there is something like a global playground, there's no reason why there would be a diffusion of an information that would be stopped at the central sulcus. I don't. Yeah, right. I don't see why that would happen, but okay, maybe. So right. I can see. I mean, maybe dorsolateral prefrontal, which has been a big focus for global workspace, maybe it switches off. We don't see it in the source reconstruction here, so maybe it switches off. But I mean, I cannot see how the frontal cortex in general could be like completely not interested. But yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's a huge piece of real estate. Like it doesn't care about consciousness at all. Seems weird. What they're doing. Yes. Yeah. So I think that's a good point. But I think that the things that you're talking about are also interesting. Empirically, they're cool. Like the techniques are awesome, but conceptually they're cool. But it also just illustrates how much further we have to go, because some of the most basic questions, I feel like we're not even able to formulate right at the neurological level, or like what would count as evidence. And yet there is this kind of assumption that we can, it's all decoding. It's just like, it's getting the fMRI and decode, and then we'll know. And it's like, it's sometimes I wonder if this, we got a couple steps before. That doesn't mean we should give up. I'm not against science, obviously, but I think there's sometimes unrealistic expectations about, like, narrowing the field, falsifying theories, like given what we know now. Can we do that? It's not clear that we're yet there.
But it's good to give it a try.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And what else are we going to do? Right?
Exactly.
Exactly. But I do worry that there's this tendency to be like, for example, like for the prefrontal thing we were just talking about, there's this tendency to say, oh, well, fMRI null results, therefore no prefrontal involvement in consciousness. And it seems like that line of argument is just like, really? we don't know enough for that to be very convincing. It's a piece of evidence. I don't think we should dismiss it, but I don't think we know enough to say, yeah, all right, let's give up on the prefrontal cortex because null results, or that even should move us in one result. So anyway, I don't want to get on my hobby horse, but it does strike me that there is this kind of enthusiasm for bad arguments running around. Not here, not now, but and I'm guilty of it too. You know, whatever. So. Because if you read these common papers on consciousness, like the first paragraph is like straw manning every other position and then like moving on to what you want to say. Not you, but I mean, like I do it too. So, because it's hard to get the nuance and the detail of all these positions right. But anyway.
That's, but it's what you're describing sounds like the rule of the game. I mean, we have to play, I mean, but maybe we should, and be more honest. Probably you have to get to the discussion to be a bit more honest. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm all for that, you know, and obviously it's easy for me to say, I don't have to ask anyone for money to do my job. But, you know, scientists, they got to convince people that, you know, what they're doing is important and interesting, and people got to give you money to do it. And it's like, I'm a philosopher.
And will cure schizophrenia.
Yeah, exactly. You got to apply. Oh, and that's the other thing we haven't even talked about is how you are trying to apply these ideas as a way of, you know, seeing whether patients can recover from minimally conscious states, or all of those sorts of things, which are consciousness metery-esque, which this seems like a really cool way of addressing those kind of questions. Yeah. Do you see any competition between this view and like the IIT? Because IIT, I see the IIT people as also being interested in bifurcations. They explain them in terms of so they might look at your data and say, aha, what you've shown is that in the unconscious, there's not integration, and what you're hooking onto is a signal of information integration or something. So do you think that you can rule out that interpretation, or so?
No, I don't. I don't think I can, or I would like to. I mean, I don't know. I think there are lots of commonalities between the ideas developed by IIT and the ones from the global workspace. But a major difference is this functional perspective that I was talking about. I think
they don't have that.
Yes, and I'm not ready to take that step that they do take, that any connected system with this specific kind of connection is going to be conscious. For me, you have to connect things that do some information processing, or that do like have a functional role.
Right, exactly. Okay. So given what you just said, I wonder, maybe you don't want to comment, but do you have any, are you optimistic about this Stan, Julio collaboration, adversarial thingamajig? And by optimistic, I mean, do you think that the results can actually adjudicate any of these things we've been talking about, or help move this discussion forward? Or will each side just find a way to explain the results in their own way and say, yeah, more work needs to be done?
I'm sure it will end up, I mean, I don't think each of the theories sufficiently specified so that one will not be able to say, okay, but, and I think that's fine. I think that's, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there will be one saying, okay, I give up. But,
yeah, right. I doubt it very much.
No, really. I mean, can you seriously? Okay. I don't know, but I mean, again, I don't care. I mean, if that's just for me, that's just a machine to have us go forward.
So, but do you think it is a way to go forward, though? I guess is really what I'm asking.
I think that's what I'm most excited about. For example, IIT. For all the reservation I have about the sometimes esoteric aspect of it, I think has led to beautiful experimental results. Massimini's experiments showing the effect of TMS and how a pulse of TMS will propagate differently depending on your conscious state. I think that's beautiful data. The interpretation can be such and such and such.
Is that the basis of the zip and zap? Is that what you're talking about?
Sorry?
That's the basis of the zip and zap thing that they do? The zap
Yes,
being
zip and zap
measuring the spread.
is your word for TMS, or?
No, I thought, well, never mind. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought that one way they want to test whether someone is conscious or not is by TMSing them and then measuring the spread of it.
Yes.
And then seeing, so that's what I was thought you were talking about, but maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly that. Yeah. And these experiments that have shown different way, indeed, in different, for example, comparing wakefulness and anesthesia, have shown that the propagation of a TMS pulse is going to be completely different in a brain that's awake versus not awake. I think it's a beautiful result, and I'm grateful for IIT or whatever to have brought about this this idea. You know what I mean? So
yeah, exactly. So, and that's, you know, because people that are there are different views here, but if a theory leads to something useful, then it can't be all bad. I hear part of what you're saying is we've got something useful out of this theory. So even if it's wrong or I don't like it, it's worth having it around because it's giving us something to think about in a new way.
Yeah, and in the end, the theory is almost necessarily wrong. I mean, it's okay. I start with this idea. I mean,
the theories are all like ladders meant to be kicked away eventually when we get a better theory, the higher ladder. So I agree completely. People get too married to their theories, but so I'm glad that because it sounds like the optimism of this conversation is wonderful, because it's like we don't agree that science proceeds one funeral at a time. Like we don't just have to wait for all these old views to die off because the people who support them die off. Like you're saying, we can be reasonable and like adjust our views to the evidence and not be irrationally committed to our theories and defend them at all costs and realize when maybe we should reject them. Those are all great things that I wish some more scientists would say.
You
even if they really.
The case?
Sorry?
You think it's not the case at the moment? That people are too married to their theories?
I think that there's a cynical way of thinking where that saying that science progresses one funeral at a time is sort of the idea that, people, they spend their whole life defending a theory. And then, you know, the reason why people stop talking about it is just because they kind of die. And then people, you know, there's no one bugging us about it anymore. So we kind of move on. Yeah. But it's not real progress. Like we haven't discovered anything. It's just like that annoying person who always said, you know, IIT is now no longer here. So we're not talking about it. And that's a real cynical view, I think, where everyone's just in it for their own, you know, but I'm not saying I really believe that, but I'm saying I know people who believe that, and I'm not 100% convinced it's not the case. So, but it is nice to hear people saying the things you're saying, like, no, we're not that way. Science, we are not just theory-minded persons. We're open to revising, and we have to recognize that we could be wrong and probably are wrong. So it's just nice to hear you saying that someone that's not a philosopher recognizing these things, and that's just nice. Anyway, I do notice the time. I've kept you forever. I feel like we get this conversation going another 6 hours, but I have my swimming lesson for my 6-year-old I have to go to, so I do have to wrap this up. But I do wonder at the end, Claire, was there anything that you really were expecting would come up that you wanted to talk about that hasn't come up? The answer can be no, but I'd just like to check.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to say I'm very grateful for this discussion.
No, thank you.
I think it. I knew that it would be so great to speak with a philosopher because, I mean, like, you're how do you say that? You help conceptions come out of my mind.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Socrates said he was a midwife of ideas. Exactly. That's sort of what philosophers do.
Yeah, midwife was the term I was trying to find.
Very traditional philosophical term.
I think, a very beardy midwife, but still.
Thank you. But, my pandemic beard survived the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's
so I think that's really cool. And that's really a fruitful thought for me, and I hope we'll have other conversations like that. and from the evidence, and from the other for the other question, do I have anything I wanted to speak about? Yeah, we didn't mention this other aspects of what I've been doing, which is trying to probe whether you can become conscious of something retrospectively.
Ah, interesting.
And I think yeah. So in a nutshell, if you're committed to the idea that becoming conscious is not occurring during the early phase of sensory processing, but it's occurring when you lock into this communication mode, then you're led to the prediction that if there can be some unconscious sensory traces in your system, and you can after the fact manage to connect these traces to the workspace, then you could become conscious of a stimulus, not at the moment where it was presented, but at another arbitrary moment where you triggered this
that's awesome.
workspace. So that's part of my of what I'm doing as well. And we've got some evidence that indeed you can be presented a stimulus, you were not conscious of it, and then I tell you, oh, did you notice what happened here? And you say, oh yes, I see X, but X was actually presented like 400 milliseconds before, etc. And
Right.
we're looking at the neural correlates of that, and I think that's I think that might be these kind of phenomena might reconcile the limited aspect of conscious access that we know from psychology. Like it seems that conscious access is just processing one thing at a time,
Right.
and the more and our impression of a richness of the environment, because then we see a mechanism by which we can trace back to things that we could not handle in the moment, but that were still important. So this flexibility in time, I think, is another interesting aspect that we did not have a time to cover, but that's fine.
Well, hopefully we'll have time another time when you can come back, because I'd love to have you back and talk about that. And is that the retrodiction stuff, post-diction? Is that post-diction stuff that you're talking about?
Yeah. So the specific work I've been doing, I've been calling retroperception, but it's really close to other work called post-diction, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I will. I guess I would love to talk about that. That stuff's super interesting. So I'm gonna have to have you back. I do have to run because I am doing the pool here. So I appreciate your time. This conversation was fantastic. And just hang out for 1 second. I'll say bye off the air, but if you don't mind, ending the stream now. Oops, trying to end. Okay, we're clear.